Welcome to FearBound Stories. Please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now let's begin. They called it Blackwater Marsh, a place where the mud swallowed footprints in the air tasted like rot. Locals said the swamp didn't just hide things, it kept them. Caleb Myers didn't believe any of that. He worked for the county wildlife survey team and spent most of his days checking animal counts, monitoring water levels, and clearing old fishing traps. Nothing supernatural, nothing strange, until the night he found the boat. It was just before sundown when Caleb noticed something drifting between the cypress trees. A small aluminum skiff, barely visible through the hanging moss. It bobbed gently in the black water, moving without current. He thought maybe it belonged to an old fisherman, but when he paddled closer, he felt his gut tighten. The inside of the boat was slashed apart. Deep gouges carved through the metal as if something had torn into it. Mud, water, and something darker pooled at the bottom. Caleb leaned in for a better look and found a torn shirt, ripped clean down the middle, as if someone had been pulled out of it. He called out, "Anyone out here?" His voice vanished into the swamp, smothered by humidity. He should have turned back right then. But the last time someone vanished in this area, the county blamed Caleb's department. So he tied his canoe to the damaged skiff and stepped inside carefully. A single set of footprints covered the deck, bare feet leading from the bow to the stern, and then stopping. No signs of someone climbing out. No signs of someone falling in. Just footprints, ending in the middle of the boat. Caleb's radio crackled suddenly. "Do you see it?" whispered a voice. He jerked upright. "See what? Who is this?" Static. Then clearer. "Don't turn around." Caleb spun anyway. No one was there. The radio hissed again and then shut off completely. His heartbeat thundered. He checked the battery, fully charged. The radio wasn't dead. It had been turned off. The sun dipped lower and the swamp grew darker, colors fading into muddy blues and deep shadows. Something moved in the water behind him, a low ripple cutting across the surface, slow and heavy. He flashed his light. The beam caught only brackish water and tangled roots. A frog croaked somewhere, then another. Then everything went silent. The swamp doesn't go silent. Caleb's breath grew shallow. He backed slowly toward his canoe, stepping carefully over the torn metal. A loud splash erupted behind him. He spun, flashlight trembling. Something was moving between the trees, a shape gliding just beneath the surface. It circled the skiff once, twice, then moved directly under him. Caleb froze. The water bulged upward, as if something enormous was pressing toward the surface. Then a hand broke through. Long, pale, waterlogged skin stretched tight over bone. Fingers too long, bending wrong as they clutched the side of the boat. Another hand surfaced. Then the top of a head, hair plastered across a sunken face. A man, or what was left of one. Eyes clouded and wide, mouth hanging open as swamp water dripped from between broken teeth. Caleb stumbled backward, nearly falling into the canoe. Sir, don't move. I'll get help." The figure didn't blink, didn't breathe, just clung to the boat, staring at Caleb with an expression frozen between fear and agony. Then it opened its mouth wider, and a voice poured out. Not from its lungs, but from somewhere deep in the swamp. "Don't turn round," the radio voice. Caleb whipped around in panic. A second figure stood waist-deep in the water behind him, taller than any man should have been. Skin slick with algae, eyes entirely black, reflecting the moonlight. It tilted its head slowly, studying him like something unfamiliar with human shape. Caleb scrambled into his canoe, pushing off with desperate hands. The skiff rocked violently as the first figure clawed higher, its drenched body folding unnaturally over the edge like a puppet being lifted by invisible strings. Caleb paddled hard, nearly capsizing as he fled. The water around him erupted with movement, splashes echoing on all sides. He didn't look back. He kept paddling until the trees thinned and the air changed. Birds began calling again in the distance, the first sound in minutes. Only when he reached open water did he glance behind him. The damaged skiff floated silently empty again. No bodies, no figures. Just the torn shirt still draped over the edge. Back at the station, Caleb reported what he saw. They sent teams to search for the missing fishermen, but no remains were ever found. The skiff, however, was recorded as evidence. 2 days later, Caleb returned to check it. Something new had been carved into the metal hull with deep, unnatural gouges. Don't come back. It's waiting under the water. Caleb quit his job a week later. But sometimes late at night when the marsh fog rolls in thick and heavy, he swears he hears his radio whispering again. Don't turn around. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Dylan Rawls had grown up near the Okatoba swamps, but he never liked going out there after dark. He knew the noises, the smells, the creatures that moved through the reeds. But he also knew the stories. Old ones, whispered by fishermen, and passed along by families who'd lived by the water for generations. They called it the Lantern Man, a figure who wandered the marsh at night holding a flickering orange light, luring people deeper into the swamp until they sank without a trace. Dylan always brushed it off as superstition, until the night he heard the screaming. He was checking water quality sensors near the edge of the marsh when a shrill cry cut through the trees. At first he thought it was an animal, some wounded bobcat or a crane caught in wire. But then the scream turned into words. "Help, someone, please!" A woman's voice, close, terrified. Dylan grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the sound, pushing past reeds taller than his shoulders. The mud sucked at his boots with every step, thick and heavy. The sky had turned from gray to black in minutes, clouds swallowing the last bit of daylight. The voice came again, louder, broken by sobs. "Please, I'm stuck!" He splashed through a shallow pool and stopped when his light caught something ahead. An old, rotted wooden walkway stretching deeper into the swamp. He hadn't seen it before. It wasn't on any survey map. It looked like something built decades ago and abandoned. "Hello?" he called out. The swamp answered with silence. He stepped onto the walkway slowly. The wood creaked under him, water bubbling up between the boards. His flashlight beam jittered across moss-covered railings and stagnant pools thick with algae. Then he saw it. A lantern. Hanging from a branch about 40 yards ahead, swaying gently as if touched by a breeze he couldn't feel. The light was a deep, sickly orange, the kind you see from old oil flames. Dylan froze. He hadn't heard the woman's voice again, not since the lantern appeared. He raised his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at..." Static. Thick, suffocating static. A splash echoed to his left, then another closer to his right. Something was moving beneath the walkway, pacing him, following him. The boards vibrated beneath his feet. He forced himself forward, gripping the rail, eyes locked on the lantern. As he got closer, his flashlight illuminated a shape beside it, something kneeling in the mud. A person, long hair, thin arms, clothing soaked and torn, clinging to a body that shivered violently. "Ma'am, it's okay," Dylan said gently. "I'm here to help." She didn't look up. Didn't move. Just continued to shake, whispering something too softly to hear. Dylan stepped off the walkway and into knee-deep water, wincing as the muck wrapped around his legs. He slogged toward her, heart hammering. When he got within a few feet, he realized something was off. Her hair wasn't wet, it was coated in algae. Her skin wasn't pale, it was gray like old stone. And her arms weren't shaking, they were twitching stiff like something pulling invisible strings. Dylan's breath caught. Are you hurt? Her head snapped upward in one violent motion. The eyes were wrong. Completely white, swollen, drifting in their sockets like they weren't attached properly. Her jaw hung loose, unhinged. Mud seeped out. She whispered, voice wet and drowned. Not me. Dylan stumbled backward. The lantern above her flickered wildly, casting long shadows. He turned to run toward the walkway and stopped dead. A tall figure stood on the boards, too tall. Bent forward, spine curved unnaturally like its bones were soft. Its arms hung long, fingers dragging grooves into the wood. And in its right hand it held the lantern. The white glow reflected off what should have been a face, but wasn't. Just smooth, bloated skin, water dripping off it in long strings. A hole carved where a mouth should have been, stretching wide into darkness. It took one slow step forward. The lantern swung gently. Dylan backed into the water. The woman thing beside him began to sink slowly, pulled straight down without struggle, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple. The tall figure moved again, its legs bending like reeds, unnatural and soft. Its footsteps made the boards groan. Dylan turned and ran through the swamp, crashing through water and brush, branches ripping at his clothes. The lantern light behind him grew brighter, reflecting off the surface of the water in unnatural ripples. He didn't stop until he reached the main trail, dry ground, lights from the ranger station flickering faintly through the trees. Only then did he collapse, gasping, shaking. When backup came, they searched the area. The old walkway was gone, completely gone. No boards, no lantern, no footprints, nothing. But Dylan knew what he saw. And a week later, when he returned to check one of the sensors near the marsh, he found something hanging from a tree branch. A lantern. Still warm, still glowing orange. And on the ground beneath it, written in the mud with long dragging lines. Not human. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Deputy Liam Carter hated patrolling Blue Ridge Swamp at night. The place had a way of swallowing sound, light, and sense all at once. Even his cruiser headlights barely cut through the fog. Still, when a 911 call came in at 2:14 a.m. from an old fisherman claiming he saw lights dancing in the marsh, Liam had to check it out. He parked at the end of an old dirt road, the kind no one maintained anymore, and stepped out with his flashlight. The air was thick, humming with insects that suddenly went silent the moment he shut the door. That wasn't normal. He walked toward the waterline, boots sinking slightly in the mud. The fog rose in slow curls around the cypress knees, drifting like fingers trying to reach him. He scanned the dark water. Nothing. No lanterns. No boats. No movement. Then his radio clicked softly, like someone pressing the button but not speaking. "Dispatch?" he asked. Silence. Another click. Then a soft voice, not dispatch. "Don't step in the water." Liam froze. "Who is this?" Static swallowed the answer. His flashlight flickered. He tapped it. The beam steadied, sweeping across the swamp until it stopped on something strange. Tiny lights flickering between the trees, bobbing like fireflies. Except they were too big, too bright, too synchronized. They drifted left to right, weaving between the trees like a group of people carrying lanterns, moving in perfect formation. Liam crouched behind a cypress, squinting. The lights grew closer until he could make out shapes, tall, human-like silhouettes moving shoulder to shoulder through the fog. He raised his radio again. "I see multiple subjects, possibly hikers, moving in a line, approaching the waterway." No response. He stepped forward to call out, then stopped when he noticed something about their movement. They didn't walk. They didn't shift their weight. They didn't even sway. They slid, gliding silently over mud and water, lanterns hovering in their hands like floating orbs. Liam's throat tightened. He called out anyway. "Sheriff's Department, if you need help, announce yourself." Every light stopped at once. All silhouettes froze. The lanterns flickered. Then, in perfect unison, every figure turned to face him. Liam stumbled back, lifting his flashlight. There were no faces, no features. Just smooth, pale shapes reflecting the light like wet clay. And their lanterns were not lanterns at all. Small globes of fire hovering inches above their hands, burning without smoke. One by one, they raised those lights higher, illuminating the fog around them. And behind Liam, he didn't turn at first. He felt the heat on his neck before he heard the crackling breath behind his ear. "Don't step in the water." He spun around, nearly falling. A figure stood inches away, closer than any human should have been able to approach without sound. Its face was stretched, long, the skin sagging like melted wax. A glowing orb hovered at its shoulder height, casting sharp shadows over ridges and hollows that looked too deep, like the swamp had carved the shape rather than growing it. Liam backed away, heart pounding. "Stay back!" The figure tilted its head, the motion jerky, curious. Then it stepped forward, not gliding, but sinking its bare, pale foot directly into the swamp water. The water hissed. Steam rose. The creature shuddered. Liam realized with horror that the voice had warned him because the creatures themselves couldn't touch the water without pain. But now they knew he could. More silhouettes approached from behind him, closing in like a tightening circle. Their floating flames pulsed brighter, burning a strange orange that made the fog glow. One of them whispered, not with a mouth but deep inside his head, "Come with us." Liam bolted. He sprinted along the bank, nearly tripping over roots and mud. The creatures followed, gliding parallel to him between the trees, matching his pace without effort. Their lantern lights brightened the swamp like a nightmare parade. He reached a fallen log bridging two patches of land and jumped over it, and landed ankle-deep in swamp water. A scream tore from his throat as something cold, slimy, and impossibly strong wrapped around his ankle. A hand. A human hand. Waterlogged. Gray. Fingers tightening around his boot. He kicked wildly, flashlight flying out of his grasp. The hand pulled him further. The mud swallowed his other foot. The water rose halfway up his shin. Dozens of pale hands reached up next. Dozens, as if the bottom of the swamp were made of bodies just beneath the surface. "Get off!" he screamed, grabbing a low branch. For a moment, he felt himself being pulled under, mud filling his boot, cold shooting up his spine. But adrenaline surged and he ripped himself free, stumbling onto dry land. He didn't stop running until he reached his cruiser. The lights stopped following him once the gravel started. Back at the station, he tried to write the report, but he couldn't explain what he saw, not in words they'd accept. He quit 2 weeks later. Still, some nights when he's driving home past the marsh, he sees the lights again, floating in a perfect line, drifting between the trees. And every time his radio clicks softly. Once. Twice, then a whisper. "Don't step in the water." Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Old Man Harrow owned 50 acres along the deepest edge of Calver Swamp, a place the locals called the Root Maze. The ground there was barely ground at all, just thick mud and tangled roots woven into natural platforms. People avoided it. Hunters refused to track deer near it. Even airboats turned away when the water level dropped and exposed the twisting shapes beneath. But Harrow kept bees there. Strange black-winged swamp bees that thrived in the rot and humidity. He swore the honey they produced kept a man living longer than God intended. Nobody believed him, but nobody questioned him either. Not until he stopped coming into town. 3 weeks passed, no deliveries. No sightings, no word. So the sheriff sent 2 people to check on him, Harrow's nephew Luke and Luke's friend Rowan, who knew the swamp better than anyone their age. Rowan had paddled those waters since he was a kid. He could smell the difference between normal rot and something wrong. That day, everything smelled wrong. They reached Harrow's property close to dusk. His old shack stood on stilts above the murky water, bees drifting lazily in thick clusters around the hives. But Harrow wasn't tending them. The place was silent. Too silent. Rowan tapped the dock with his paddle. "Harrow!" he shouted. His voice bounced strangely, like the swamp swallowed half of it. Luke climbed up first. The front door was cracked open, but the wood around the frame was warped, as if something damp had pressed against it for hours. Inside, the house was a mess. Jars of honey lay shattered across the floorboards. Something had clawed at the walls, deep grooves that split the wood clean through. Rowan knelt and touched the marks. "These aren't animal," he muttered. Luke found Harrow's journal on the table. The last page had only one line written over and over. "The roots are moving." Rowan pushed open the back door to get air, but instead froze mid-step. The entire backyard, usually a shallow pool dotted with roots, looked different. Everything had sunk. The water was lower than it should have been, revealing thick, twisted roots rising out of the mud like skeletal fingers. They formed spirals, loops, hollows, places where something could hide. Luke climbed down the back steps, calling out for his uncle again. Then Rowan heard it, the buzzing, not the normal hum of bees. This was deeper, throatier, almost like growling. The hives trembled. "Luke," Rowan whispered, backing up. "Get away from the roots." But Luke stepped closer, crouching to look at something half-buried beneath the mud. Rowan's stomach twisted when he recognized it. Harrow's hat. Coated in muck, the brim bent, the crown torn open. Luke reached for it, and the ground pulsed. Not shifted, not cracked, pulsed. A vibration rippled through the roots, traveling outward in a perfect circle. Bees erupted from the hives, swarming violently, covering the air like a living cloud. Luke swatted at them, shouting, stumbling backward. Rowan grabbed his arm. "Run!" But the roots surged upward. Thick cords of wood snapped from the mud like the arms of buried creatures. They coiled around the stilts of the house, around the hives, around the posts of the dock. The entire structure groaned. Luke dropped the hat and pulled away, but more roots exploded from the ground, drenched in black water and slime. They curved toward him like blind serpents searching for heat. Rowan shoved him toward the canoe. "Go, go!" Luke made it to the edge of the dock. Rowan pushed him in and jumped after him just as a massive root burst through the wood where they'd been standing, splintering the boards. They paddled frantically, bees swirling overhead like a storm. Behind them, the shack collapsed. Not down, but into the ground. Dragged beneath the surface by the writhing mass of roots, swallowed whole. Hives toppled in, bees vanishing instantly. The water sucked down, swirling in a violent spiral as if the swamp itself were breathing in. Only when they reached the deeper water did the buzzing fade. Only then did the swamp go quiet again. Luke stared at the spot where the house had been, shaking. What the hell was that? What happened to my uncle? Rowan didn't answer at first. He just stared into the water, watching the ripples smooth out. Finally, he spoke, voice hollow. "Harrow told me once the swamp wasn't soil and it was a mouth." Luke swallowed hard. "You think it killed him?" Rowan didn't look up. "I think it took him." Neither of them spoke for the rest of the trip back, but Rowan noticed something Luke didn't. Floating behind them, drifting just beneath the surface, was a shape. A human shape. Pale, bloated, limbs stretching unnaturally long, tangled in roots like they'd grown from his body. And his chest still moved. Barely. A slow rhythm, almost like breathing. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Mara Delaney had lived near the Grafin wetlands her entire childhood, but she never stepped foot into the place after sunset. No one did. Locals said the fog there wasn't real fog. It was something alive, something that swallowed sound and memory. They said it brought things back from the water, things that didn't stay dead. Her younger brother Shane didn't believe any of that, which is how he ended up kayaking into the wetlands one night with two friends, chasing thrills, filming videos, laughing at the stories they grew up hearing. Only one of them made it back. Barely. Shane stumbled out of the water at 3 a.m., clothes shredded, arms covered in long dark bruises that looked like the fingerprints of giant hands. He kept repeating the same thing. "It wasn't fog, it wasn't fog, it wasn't fog." He collapsed before he could say more. Mara didn't wait for the sheriff or any search party. She grabbed a lantern, took Shane's kayak, and paddled straight into the wetlands to find the others. The fog thickened almost immediately. Not white, but gray, dense, swirling, drifting just above the water like it had weight. Every paddle stroke was muffled. Every ripple died instantly. She couldn't tell where the sky ended and the swamp began. After 20 minutes, she found the first boat. Empty, floating sideways. Deep claw marks gouged into the plastic hull. Something had been dragging its nails along the sides or trying to pull it under. Mara's breath hitched. The silence around her felt heavy, pressing against her ears. She raised her lantern and called out, "Ethan, Maury, can you hear me?" Her voice didn't echo. Instead, it came back wrong, soft, distorted, like someone repeating her words through thick water. "Hear me! Hear me!" She spun around, searching the fog. A shape sat in the water 20 feet away. A man, shoulders floating above the surface, head drooped forward. "Maury?" she called. The figure twitched. Then slowly, unnaturally, its head turned toward her, rotating far too long, like its neck was bent wire instead of bone. It wasn't Maury. Its eyes were open, blank and empty, reflecting light like a fish's. Water poured from its mouth with every shallow breath. Then it sank, straight down without moving its arms. Like a puppet being pulled into the depths, Mara dropped her paddle. Something brushed the bottom of her kayak. She jerked, gripping the sides. The fog thickened suddenly, curling over her legs, creeping higher. The air smelled like rotted lilies. She tried to paddle backward, but the kayak barely moved. Then she heard it. Breathing. Below her, heavy, slow, dragging breaths, like an enormous pair of lungs filling with water. She leaned over the side, lantern shaking. Something pale glided under the surface. Large, human-shaped, but wrong. Elongated, dragging long, trailing limbs behind it. Its hands, if they were hands, skimmed the mud as it moved, stirring the water in slow, deliberate circles. Mara froze. The fog around her shifted, lifting like a curtain. A second figure stood directly ahead of her kayak, half submerged, unmoving. Only its head and shoulders above water. It looked like Ethan this time, but Ethan wasn't that tall. And Ethan didn't have a jaw stretched open so wide it split the skin near his ears. A low gurgling sound bubbled out like swamp water boiling. The figure raised an arm, long, bony, bending too many times at the joints, and pointed at her. Fog surged forward, swallowing her in an instant. Something grabbed her kayak and yanked. Mara fell out, plunging into freezing water. Mud swallowed her legs instantly. Something wrapped around her ankle, rough, textured like bark or old rope. She kicked wildly, reaching for the surface, but the thing tightened. She screamed underwater, bubbles erupting around her face. Her hand brushed something, fabric. She grabbed it desperately and pulled herself toward it. It was Shane's backpack, the same one he wore when he left. But it was tied to something far below, anchored by long, pale fingers. She clawed upward, lungs burning, breaking the surface with a gasp. Fog circled her like a living thing, clinging to her arms, her neck, her face. She thrashed blindly until her hand struck the side of a tree stump. She dragged herself onto it, coughing, shivering uncontrollably. Her lantern floated nearby, still lit. Behind her, shapes gathered in the shallow water. 3, then 5, then more. All standing half-submerged, motionless, some tall, some small, some missing pieces, all staring at her with blank, reflective eyes. The fog thickened again, rising like a tide. The figures moved closer, in unison, their bodies gliding through mud and water with silent determination. Mara clutched the lantern to her chest. Something whispered behind her ear, a voice that sounded like Shane's, but something deeper beneath it. Don't breathe the fog." She held her breath. The figures stopped. Every one of them tilted their heads the same way, like they all heard a signal she couldn't. Then they sank, all at once, like stones dropping through water. The fog collapsed into the swamp with them, falling like a heavy blanket. Mara didn't move until sunrise. Search teams found her hours later, still clutching the lantern, eyes wide, whispering the same thing Shane had. It wasn't fog, it wasn't fog. They never found Ethan or Maury. But weeks later, during low tide, searchers spotted something stuck between the roots. A human-shaped figure made of tangled swamp vines, with a familiar backpack woven into its chest. You've just crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown. If you felt the fear tonight, make sure to subscribe before you leave, because on this channel every story is just the beginning. New nightmares arrive every few nights, each one darker than the last. Until then, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open. You are now part of the FearBound family.